What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. On today's video, I've got a good one for you. Today's video, we are looking at the newly updated, and when I say newly updated, I'm talking about some big updates to the Salomon Aero Glide. Guys, this is the Salomon Aero Glide 3, and I have run in the Aero Glide, the Aero Glide 2, and now the Aero Glide 3, and I can tell you that this is the best one yet, and it's for a couple reasons, so you're gonna wanna hang around. Let's get into it. Before we get started, I do just want to say that Salomon was good enough to send me this pair of the Aero Glide 3 for the purpose of review. However, they haven't told me what to say. They don't have any editorial privileges, and all the thoughts and opinions are my own. With that said, you're going to be able to pick up a pair of the Salomon Aero Glide 3 for $160. And of course, I'll place a link in the show notes below in case you want to pick up a pair for yourself. So the Salomon Aero Glide 3 is a max cushion daily trainer. I tell you, there are a lot of max cushion daily trainers out there now. Now, I'm not sure where you draw the line between what is a high cushion daily trainer and a max cushion daily trainer, and if you really think there's that much difference between a couple of millimeters of stack height. But the Aero Glide 3 does have 41 in the heel, 33 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. Now, Salomon claims that in a US men's size 9, the Aero Glide 3 would hit the scale at 8.6 ounces or 245 grams. But in my size, a US men's size 12.5, Aero Glide 3 tips the scale at 10.3 ounces or 291 grams. So for a max cushion daily trainer, a sub 300 gram shoe for me is actually quite impressive. And just holding this in my hand as I'm talking to you, it feels very light. But of course, the Salomon Aero Glide 3 doesn't exist in a vacuum. If you are thinking of picking up a pair of these, you're probably thinking of some other shoes too. And I think you might also consider the Hoka Skyflow. Now the Hoka Skyflow has 40 in the heel, 35 in the forefoot for a 5mm drop. It'll cost you $160, so the same price as the Aero Glide 3, and weighs in at 339 grams. So the Skyflow weighs 48 grams more than the Aero Glide 3. Next up, I think we can compare it to the Ultra Forward Via. Now the Ultra Forward Via has 37 in the heel, 33 in the forefoot for a 4mm drop. It will also cost $160, so the same price as the Aero Glide 3, and in my size tips the scale at 313 grams. So it weighs 22 grams more than the Aero Glide 3. We're looking pretty good on weight with the Aero Glide 3, right? Next up, I think we can compare it to the On Cloud Surfer 2. Now the On Cloud Surfer 2 has 32 in the heel, 23 in the forefoot for a 9mm drop. It'll also cost $160, so again, same price, and my size would tip the scale at 312 grams. So a little heavier at 21 grams more than the Aero Glide 3. Now the reason I compared the Aero Glide 3 with the Cloud Surfer 2 was because of the versatility of the ride. I think both of these shoes, well, I mean, they're the same price, so that's another reason. But I think both of these shoes allow you to run easy and to pick up the pace. And then finally, I do want to compare the Aero Glide 3 to the Saucony Ride 18. Now the Ride 18 was brought to my attention as a comparable by a commenter on my review of the Ride 18. And I thought about it, and I gotta say they weren't wrong. Now the Ride 18 has 35 in the heel, 27 in the forefoot for an 8mm drop. It'll cost $140, so it's $20 less than the Aero Glide 3. And in my size tips the scale at 329 grams, which is 38 grams more than the Aero Glide 3. Now that's quite a big weight difference. If there's one thing we've learned with these comparables, the Aero Glide 3 is a light shoe. But it's the ride of the Ride 18 that made me think that these were actually a good comparable. Because they're both daily trainers, although I wouldn't call this a max cushion daily trainer, and they both ride quite firm. They both also have beaded foams. There it is. So with that, let's get started on what makes the Aero Glide the Aero Glide. And let me hold this up so you can see the heel collar. And I know this is going to be difficult for you guys to see or actually gauge against other shoes, but the heel collar padding on the Aero Glide 3 is just slightly thinner than it is on some other daily trainers. But there is more than enough padding there just to have a very comfortable fit. Now, speaking of fit, the Salomon Aero Glide 3 does fit me true to size, and that is pretty much the same size that I wear in all shoes. I do tend to be a US men's 12.5 to size 13 in most shoes across the board. Now, as far as the fit goes, it wasn't that long ago when Salomon was just notorious for making a very narrow shoe. And even with the last version, the Aero Glide 2, it was probably just a little narrower than we have on the Aero Glide 3, but before that it was even narrower. But Salomon is making a much roomier fit, and we have a slightly wider toe box and just a much more generous fit overall. Now, I still had a good lockdown, I didn't have any heel slip, the heel counter is fairly rigid, and while we're back here on the back, you can see this kind of shark's fin that sticks out here. And this is actually something new that Salomon is trying to move all the seams to the outside. And basically that is going to reduce the amount of material that they use to cover up the seams on the inside. And now that we know that, if we look at the rest of the shoe, we can talk about some of the overlays. So first of all, we've got the regular overlays with this overlay coming around the toe bumper. Salomon is using a 3D open mesh upper, which is just super breathable, but there are different patterns kind of sewn into this upper just to give it a lot of structure. Then if we look on both sides, here on the lateral side and on the medial side, we see this zigzag. This is Salomon's Sensi Fit. And basically this is tied into the eyelet chain where the laces are. So when you cinch down those laces, it actually gives you a good mid-foot lockdown. And of course, on all other Salomon shoes, we are used to seeing the SensiFit system on the inside of the shoe. So they've moved it to the outside just to keep it right on brand with everything else. We do have a seam coming all the way around the heel collar, which I suppose would usually be on the inside. And then for the eyelet chain, well, the laces are kind of sewn into these externally sewn on gillies. So we have 3 lace loops on each side of the shoe, and they are just kind of bolted onto the outside. Tell you, it works. Didn't have any trouble with the laces, and by that I mean that when I tied them, they didn't come untied, which is really what I want. Something I did notice though, the laces to me just seem to be a little too long. I don't know how difficult that is for you to gauge on camera, but they're a little long. Although, I tell you, probably better too long than too short. The tongue is not gusseted, but we do have a lace loop here on the front. But here's the thing about the tongue. Now, if I pull this up so you guys can see, it looks kind of big and funny, right, like that. But the tongue is actually sewn into the eyelet chain, starting at about here. So it's very high up the shoe. So even though the tongue is not gusseted, it is sewn into place. So it's really not going anywhere. We just have this top bit that you would think would flap around a bit, but it's long on the sides and it just wraps around your foot nicely. And what I really like to see, because again, this is a daily trainer, is that the tongue on the Aero Glide 3 is also fairly thin. Now, it's in no way a race day type of thin where it's just like one piece of fabric. There is some padding in there, but Salomon hasn't overdone it, which is kind of obvious because if you remember all those weights of those other comparable shoes, they were all just way heavier than the Aero Glide 3. Okay, so let's now come down to the midsole, because this is probably the biggest change that Salomon has made to the Aero Glide 3 over the Aero Glide and the Aero Glide 2. Now, in the Aero Glide and the Aero Glide 2, Salomon was using their Energy Foam, and in the Aero Glide 3, Salomon has graduated to the Energy Foam Evo. Now, the Energy Foam Evo is a beaded supercritical TPU foam, and it is by no means soft and plush. Like, you're not going to put your foot into this shoe and then get lost. Like, it's not going to zap your power. It's still definitely on the firm side, and that is part of the reason I wanted to compare it to the Ultra Forward Via, which is also a fairly firm ride. But it is in no way too firm, and I cannot say the same thing about the Energy Foam in the Aero Glide and the Aero Glide 2. Of course, I'm sure there are a lot of fans of the Aero Glide and the Aero Glide 2 out there that like that level of firmness, but from a personal preference, it really wasn't for me. Now, Salomon has really changed the game with the Energy Foam Evo because they've made it just lighter, slightly softer, and definitely more responsive. But before we get to the ride, let's just come down to the outsole, and basically we have a lot of coverage of Contra Grip outsole rubber. It really does the job. I don't know why, but I tend to think that the Contra Grip outsole rubber is one of the better outsole rubbers on the market, but if I'm perfectly honest, I can't back that up with anything. Because I live in Florida, I really don't run in the rain that often, so I don't get a chance to test how grippy outsole rubber is. But either way, I've been running in Salomon shoes for several years, and that is my overall impression. Take that for what it's worth. Now, as far as wear of this Contra Grip outsole rubber goes, yeah, it looks pretty good up on the forefoot. I am seeing a little bit of wear here on the heel, but that's not surprising. In fact, it's actually to be expected for me. And I have been running a fair amount of miles in the Aero Glide 3, so yeah, really not surprised at all to see just a slight bit of wear here on my lateral heel. But other than that, there is quite a bit of Contra Grip outsole rubber on here, and I'm going to say that these shoes are going to last above average. Oh, before we move on, we do have this decoupled midsole, which is probably going to contribute to a softer feel because we've got a lot of room when your weight goes down on the shoe for that foam to expand into. Anyway, I'm here for it. But now, let's talk about ride. And I guess I've kind of given it away by saying that the original Aero Glide and the Aero Glide 2 were so much firmer, and because that was my expectation of running in a new Aero Glide, you better believe I was very pleasantly surprised at the foam in the Aero Glide 3. So again, it's not plush, but it's definitely not firm. And it's this new Energy Foam Evo that is going to make the Salomon Aero Glide 3 a much more rounded of a shoe. I think it's really going to appeal to people that don't like a super firm shoe, but need a little bit of firmness, especially when it comes time to pick up the pace. And now that we've mentioned picking up the pace, as far as daily trainers go, the Salomon Aero Glide 3 is actually better than average at picking up the pace. And I know that is a product of its weight, but mainly the Energy Foam Evo. I found it to be very responsive, and because it wasn't plush, because it was definitely still on the firmer side of foams, I just find it's easier and more receptive to picking up the pace when the foam is slightly firmer, at least unplated shoes. And now that I've said that, I should just confirm that there is no plate inside the Aero Glide 3. Now, even though I keep going on about the foam is still fairly firm, I would have no problem going out for a long run in this shoe. I don't think I would reach for it if I was doing a recovery run or something where I just wanted to just baby my body for the run. It's probably still just a little firm for that, but for every other training run, I think the Aero Glide 3 is a really good option. Now, let's talk about the price. $160. Would I like to see it cheaper? Yeah, of course. I think maybe if they brought it down to just $150, it might be better positioned to compete against that $140 price range shoe. But at $160, we're competing with the other $160 shoes. And of course, that may or may not matter to you, so I guess you're gonna have to make that decision for yourself. But guys, now I wanna hear from you. Have you run in any of Salomon's road shoes? Are you thinking about picking up a pair of the Salomon Aero Glide 3? Drop a comment and let me know. But for now, it's Matt B. This has been my review of Salomon's Aero Glide 3. Be kind, be happy, run well. See you in a couple of days.